Ukraine tore open what Russia believed was untouchable. A single, calculated strike in Crimea that sent shockwaves far beyond the peninsula and altered the rhythm of the war itself. On December 13th, a negotiation that was supposed to slow the conflict collapsed almost instantly, and the fallout followed without delay. When Russia categorically rejected a narrowly defined ceasefire, Ukraine did not hesitate. Instead, Kyiv initiated one of its most aggressive and precisely timed strike operations since the beginning of the conflict. Intelligence reports had already confirmed a dangerous buildup of Russian missile forces inside Crimea. Dozens of Iskander systems had been quietly concentrated at a single location, the Dzhankoi missile complex. Ukrainian command understood exactly what this meant. Those missiles were not being stored defensively. They were being prepared for launch. And before they could be unleashed, Ukraine decided to act. What followed was not a warning shot. It was a methodical, high-precision assault that cut through Russian defenses and triggered one of the most destructive explosions the peninsula had seen since the war began. If detailed frontline breakdowns like this matter, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. December 13th, 8:40 a.m. The talks in Geneva ended abruptly. Western mediators had put forward a tightly limited proposal. A 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire intended to stabilize evacuation corridors and facilitate a controlled prisoner exchange. The offer was narrow by design, temporary, and aimed primarily at preventing another wave of Russian missile attacks on Ukrainian cities. But the response from the Russian delegation was immediate and dismissive. Their instructions from Moscow were clear and uncompromising. No ceasefire, no pause. All operations were to continue. At 10 p.m., Ukrainian intelligence received a consolidated alert compiled from multiple European partners. Satellite imagery revealed something highly unusual. Russian missile activity inside Crimea had intensified sharply. Over the previous 7 days, Russia had redeployed more than 30 Iskander launchers along with nearly 50 support vehicles. It was a concentration of firepower not observed since early 2023. Among all detected sites, one location stood out immediately: the Dzhankoi missile complex. Thermal imaging showed activity levels nearly 3 times higher than baseline. Analysts confirmed that between 40 and 60 Iskander ballistic and cruise missiles had been moved into underground storage chambers at the site. From that position, Russia had the capability to strike virtually every major Ukrainian city, from Kharkiv to Odessa. There was no need for further analysis. Russia's rejection of the ceasefire was not symbolic. It was preparatory. Inside a fortified operations bunker near Kyiv, Ukraine's planning staff assembled. The intelligence briefing was brief, but decisive. Waiting would give Russia time to disperse the missiles or launch first, inflicting catastrophic damage. Diplomacy had failed. Escalation was already underway. Ukraine responded. The order was issued to initiate a long-range drone strike, employing a coordinated swarm designed to overwhelm Russian air defenses and neutralize the Dzhankoi stockpile before activation. Planning concluded. Execution began. At 11:59 p.m., Crimea received no warning. It received impact. In the final second before midnight, the first wave of Ukrainian strike drones ripped into Crimean airspace at high speed. There was no reconnaissance phase, no gradual buildup, no preliminary probing. The attack began at maximum intensity. More than 30 long-range combat UAVs surged across the peninsula, some flying as low as 40 meters above ground level, far beneath the effective reach of Russia's early warning systems. At 12:01 a.m., the first explosion struck. A forward Russian radar post was hit directly. Its antenna tower collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. For 20 to critical seconds, Russian operators lost the entire northern tracking grid. It was just long enough for a full formation of drones to slip through completely undetected. At 12:03 a.m., Russian air defenses erupted into action. S-300 batteries fired 8 interceptors in just 17 seconds, a rate that pushed the systems beyond safe operational thresholds. A Panzer S-1 unit positioned near Armyansk overloaded its tracking radar and was forced into manual targeting, reducing precision to little more than guesswork. Ukrainian drones exploited 6-kilometer gaps forming in the collapsing defensive network. Then came the moment that jolted Russian command. 12:06 a.m. 3 Ukrainian drones executed a synchronized dive toward a Russian ammunition transfer point. One struck a fuel tanker dead center. The resulting explosion was violent enough to launch a rolling fireball hundreds of meters into the night sky. Windows shattered across nearby barracks. Intercepted radio traffic captured a panicked voice shouting, "They're heading for Dzhankoi. Intercept immediately." But interception was already out of reach. By 12:08 a.m., at least 9 Ukrainian drones had penetrated the final defensive ring and were accelerating directly toward the Iskander storage zone. Russian launchers overheated under sustained fire. 2 Su-300 units shut down entirely, creating a fatal 6-minute gap in coverage. The drones pressed on, coordinated, relentless, and closing in on one of Russia's most sensitive missile bunkers. What happens when they reach the underground vault? Because from this point on, the pressure only intensifies. At 12:09 a.m., the surviving Ukrainian drones crossed into the restricted military perimeter of Dzhankoi. By now, the Russian air defense grid was fractured. 2 Su-300 launchers were offline, and the remaining systems were firing blindly, unable to lock onto low-altitude targets weaving between communication towers, supply depots, and tree lines. The drones accelerated. What followed stunned even Ukrainian analysts. At 12:10 a.m., 3 drones descended sharply toward the outer security ring, a fortified zone equipped with motion sensors, infrared surveillance, and anti-drone jamming systems. Under normal circumstances, this perimeter was considered nearly impenetrable, but Russia had not prepared for simultaneous, multi-angle saturation. Two jammers overloaded instantly. The third failed moments later after a power fluctuation caused by earlier explosions. With the jamming network offline, the Ukrainian swarm regained full autonomous control. At 12:11 a.m., the first drone slammed directly into a reinforced blast door protecting the ventilation conduit of the underground bunker. The explosion was not intended to destroy the structure. It was designed to breach it. Steel plating was torn away, exposing the internal tunnel system to open air. Seconds later, the second drone followed. This was the decisive hit. Equipped with a warhead engineered for hardened targets, it detonated deep inside the tunnel, igniting stored propellant canisters. Russian emergency sensors registered a thermal spike exceeding 1200 degrees Celsius, far beyond containment thresholds. Flames surged backward through the tunnel like a pressurized furnace, instantly killing the bunker's backup crew. At 12:13 a.m., the third drone completed the strike sequence. It targeted a secondary storage chamber where an estimated 15 to 20 Iskander missiles were mounted on mobile racks. The impact triggered a chain reaction Russian engineers had once labeled theoretically possible, but operationally unlikely. They were wrong. One missile booster ignited, then another, then several more in rapid succession. The ground convulsed. A shockwave rolled across Dzhankoi, shattering windows in civilian neighborhoods more than 3 kilometers away. Residents were thrown from their beds. Car alarms screamed across the city. Russian military channels went silent for nearly 2 minutes. A complete blackout. At 12:15 a.m., a towering column of fire burst upward from the underground complex, climbing more than 200 meters into the night sky. Burning debris rained down like shrapnel. The core of Russia's missile reserve in Crimea was no longer a bunker. It was an inferno, and Russian command understood exactly what that meant. This was not a breach. It was a catastrophic, undeniable strategic collapse. At 12:16 a.m., the fire inside the Dzhankoi complex reached full detonation pressure. What began as a localized penetration escalated into a runaway chain reaction. Monitoring stations detected seismic tremors measuring to 0.3 on the local scale, caused not by natural movement, but by the violent collapse of subterranean chambers. The explosions came in waves. Every 20 to 40 seconds, another internal detonation shook the ground. Russian emergency crews attempted to approach from the western access road but were forced back twice by intense radiant heat. Temperatures near the blast crater exceeded 900 degrees Celsius, enough to melt exposed aluminum and severely warp steel beams. At 12:20 a.m., a structural failure in the eastern tunnel triggered one of the most destructive secondary detonations recorded on the peninsula. Analysts later estimated the blast released energy equivalent to 1.5 tons of TNT. Debris was hurled more than 500 meters into the air. Missile fragments were later recovered over 2 kilometers away. Residents flooded emergency lines with thousands of calls. Several described seeing multiple suns rising behind the hills, a description consistent with sequential missile booster ignitions. Panic spread across Dzhankoi. Civilians rushed toward underground shelters or attempted to flee by car, creating traffic jams stretching 5 kilometers. Inside Russian command centers, confusion spiraled into near paralysis. A senior officer reported that internal bunker sensors were transmitting impossible data. Temperatures beyond measurable range, atmospheric pressure instability, oxygen depletion warnings throughout the facility. Attempts to activate automated fire suppression systems failed. The internal pipeline network had already been destroyed by heat. At 12:27 a.m., the final collapse occurred. The central chamber buckled inward, forming a crater approximately 45 meters wide. Surrounding structures were dragged down like a sinkhole. Communication towers, perimeter fencing, and an entire loading bay vanished into the void. The Dzhankoi complex, once considered one of Russia's most secure missile storage facilities, was now an open, glowing wound in the darkness. Crimea was not just burning, it was exposed. By dawn, the scale of destruction could no longer be concealed. Satellite imagery captured at 6:42 a.m. revealed a scene analysts struggled to articulate. A crater the size of a football stadium, scorched earth radiating outward like the petals of a dead flower, and twisted remnants of what had once been Russia's prized Iskander fleet. Initial assessments confirmed the destruction of at least 18 missiles, with an additional 12 to 15 likely damaged beyond repair. Nearly one-third of Russia's active Iskander stockpile in Crimea had been eliminated in a single night. The loss forced Moscow to reroute missile units from Belgorod and Krasnodar. Even more damaging was the destruction of support infrastructure. Analysts identified the remains of 4 transporter erector launchers, 7 command and control vehicles, multiple fuel systems, and 2 mobile climate control units critical for missile stability. Replacing a single TEL alone was estimated to cost between $5 and $7 million, excluding months-long manufacturing delays caused by sanctions. The psychological impact was immediate. Troops stationed nearby were evacuated chaotically, many suffering temporary hearing loss, shock trauma, or burns. Intercepted communications captured one officer stating plainly, "We've lost the entire wing. Nothing is left." More damaging still, the strike exposed fundamental flaws in Russia's defensive doctrine. Strategic sites like Dzhankoi had been marketed as impregnable. Those claims collapsed in real time, on a global stage. Russian state media struggled to control the narrative, first blaming technical malfunctions, then denying losses altogether. Those denials unraveled as footage spread rapidly across Telegram. International observers described the strike as one of the most significant logistical losses Russia had suffered since the war began. Economists estimated replacement costs exceeding to $150 million, not including operational downtime. The battlefield equation had shifted. Russia had not merely been struck, it had been crippled at a critical node. By noon the following day, political repercussions reached Moscow. President Putin convened an emergency briefing with senior defense officials. Internal Security Council reports indicated unprecedented frustration. Commanders blamed one another for the collapse of their defense grid. The general overseeing Crimean missile logistics was quietly removed from his position. Strategically, the damage was even deeper. With Dzhankoi destroyed, Russia's ability to conduct coordinated Iskander strikes from Crimea dropped by nearly 60%. The nearest functional backup facility lay more than 280 kilometers farther from key Ukrainian cities, dramatically reducing rapid strike capability. Satellite monitoring over the next 12 hours showed frantic Russian activity. Emergency relocation of remaining missiles, redeployment of additional Panzer units from Rostov, and the construction of improvised earth-covered shelters. None of it could replace what was lost. Crimea's civilian population reacted with fear. Thousands attempted to flee northward, clogging major highways. Movement restrictions failed to prevent panic. Videos showed lines of cars stretching more than 10 kilometers. International reaction was swift. NATO analysts praised the precision and coordination of the operation. Several Western officials privately acknowledged that Ukraine had demonstrated a level of strategic sophistication previously underestimated. Energy markets reacted with brief volatility amid concerns over Russia's retaliatory capacity. Inside Ukraine, morale surged. Social media filled with messages celebrating a direct strike on one of Russia's most heavily guarded assets. The operation became more than a military success. It was a symbolic reversal. Crimea, long treated as untouchable, was no longer beyond reach. Politically, the message was unmistakable. When diplomacy is rejected, consequences follow. Russia gambled on dominance in Crimea and lost a critical component of its strategic backbone overnight. The war entered a new phase. The strike on Dzhankoi was not just another operation. It was a turning point. In a single night, Ukraine exposed vulnerabilities Russia insisted did not exist, shattered a fortified missile hub, and disrupted strategic planning across the entire Crimean theater. No bunker is truly safe. No system is invincible. No escalation goes unanswered. As smoke rose over Crimea, one reality became undeniable. The initiative had shifted. Ukraine had shown not only the ability to defend, but the capacity to reach deep into the enemy's core and dismantle its most guarded assets. And the world was watching. Can Russia recover from a loss of this magnitude? Or is this the moment the tide truly turns? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next deep dive.